In a kingdom that slept like a cat in the sun, a curious rumor prowled the corridors of the palace. Each morning, the 12 princesses appeared at breakfast with eyes bright from little sleep and shoes worn thin as whispers. Cobblers muttered over their benches, laces and leather vanishing into a mystery that could not be cut or stitched away. The king, who loved his daughters in the cautious way of men who fear what they cannot control, posted a proclamation. Whoever discovered where the princesses went each night would marry one of them, his choice, and inherit a portion of the crown. Whoever failed after 3 nights would lose not only the chance but his future, sent away in shame with nothing but his guesses. Princes arrived like comets, bright, brief, vanishing. They ate well, swore better, and woke defeated, pockets lighter, pride bruised. The princesses, 12 flames in 12 shades, said little. The eldest, Annalisa, wore responsibility like a ribbon pulled too tight. The youngest, Mara, kept a smile like a secret she hoped would not be found. Between them stood 10 sisters, each with her own music, thoughtful, sly, solemn, tender. They shared a single room hung with silk and moonlight, 12 beds in a row, 12 gowns on hooks, 12 pairs of shoes that began each evening whole and ended it tired as dawn. On the edge of the city, where roads became possibilities instead of destinations, a soldier limped home from a finished war. He had a name, Thomas, and a habit of listening. He carried a knapsack, a scar like a thin cloud along his jaw, and a silence that did not ask to be filled. At the bridge where the river narrowed, an old woman sat with a basket of pears and a face like good bread, plain, warm, honest. "You look like a man who has just put down a heavy thing and does not yet know what to lift," she said. "I have shoes and a road," Thomas answered, "and a rumor about 12 more shoes I might learn something from." "Tell me that rumor," said the woman, and when he did, she nodded once, as if she'd heard the music of it before. From her basket she drew a small bottle, green as certain lakes. "If you go to the palace," she said, "take this. It's a draught that makes a person wakeful without making him obvious. And here," she reached deeper and brought out a cloak as gray as morning. "Use this when you don't know whether you are wanted. It will not make you a better man, but it will make you harder to see. There is a difference." "What should I pay?" Thomas asked, because he understood the shape of debts. "Bring back what is missing," she said, "and pay attention to who truly wants to be found." The palace guards laughed kindly at his worn boots, but not at the scar that suggested patience. The king asked him the same question he asked every suitor. "Can you keep your eyes open and your mouth closed?" Thomas said, "I can try," which was the truest answer the king had heard in months. He was given a chamber adjoining the sisters' room, a plate of food, and a warning wrapped in courtesy. Night slid its cool hand over the city. In their room of silk and breath, the 12 sisters moved as if the moon had taught them. Annalisa counted out teaspoons of a sleeping cordial and carried one on a tray to Thomas with a smile that said she had done this before. He took the cup, tasted the rim, and felt the draught's bitter friend creeping through it. He remembered the old woman's bottle, and when the door closed, tipped its wakefulness into the cordial and swallowed. Sleep came. He did not let it keep him. He wrapped himself in the gray cloak and moved as shadows move, only where there are edges. Through the carved screen, he watched the sisters exchange looks that were part apology and part celebration. Mara opened a music box, the tune a ladder hidden inside air. With fingers deft as promises, another sister lifted a rug. Beneath it, a door. Beneath the door, steps that spiraled down. 12 pairs of feet went quiet, then quick. 12 skirts lifted. 12 hands took lanterns from their hooks like stars borrowed for an hour. Tomas followed, learning the pace of caution. The stairway smelled of earth and old storms. It opened into a passage lined with roots curled like sleeping hands. The sisters went on, their lantern stitching light into the dark. At last, the tunnel breathed out into a forest so strange the heart could not decide whether to fear it or bow. Silver trees grew there, leaves thin as coins, branches murmuring in a language that was not wind. The ground made a sound like glass when stepped on gently. Annalisa, who led, brushed a leaf with her knuckles. "We are here," she said, and the words did not echo. The forest preferred secrets. Thomas eased a twig from a branch. It rang like a bell. He tucked it into his knapsack as proof, a note he might play later. The sisters crossed the silver wood and entered a second forest, where the trunks glowed pale gold and the leaves turned the air to warm honey. From there, a third where everything, bark, leaf, light, seemed to remember a night of falling stars and hold their faceted memory. "Diamond," breathed Mara, and Thomas heard in her voice the joy of belonging. Beyond the three forests lay a lake as still as withheld speech. At its shore waited 12 boats. In each a young man stood, not princes in velvet dramas, but men with faces that had learned to be tender or brave, depending on what the day demanded. Some wore the look of those held by a spell. Others wore the look of those who had chosen it. They bowed to the sisters as to equals. Annalisa took her rower's hand. Mara took hers. Boats slid like commas into the sentence of the lake. Tomas slipped into the last boat, when its oar grip turned to coat the wood with frost as if surprised by absence. The rower, tall, tired, beautiful as certain kinds of sorrow, shivered and said, "Strange, the night is warmer than that." Tomas tucked himself smaller under the cloak. They crossed to an island where a palace rose, not the king's palace of arguments and account books, but one that shimmered with borrowed seasons. Musicians waited in a hall wired with moonlight. Shoes found floors as if they had been parted lovers. The 12 sisters danced. It was not a riot of defiance or a giggle of disobedience. It was practice turned into prayer. The music held the body the way a river holds a leaf, with intent and mercy. Tomas stood at the wall and let the sight decide things inside him. He saw Annalisa let the day slip from her shoulders and become weightless. He saw Mara stop measuring herself and simply be measure. He saw fatigue fall like a shawl and strength rise like a guest welcomed home. He began to suspect that what needed solving was not a trick, but a truth. Near midnight, the rower from the last boat left the hall and sat on the steps as if the night had asked him to talk. "Forgive me," Tomas said, drawing the cloak aside, "for being where I was not invited." The young man started, then laughed softly, surprised into gentleness. "If you were uninvited, the lake forgot to tell the boat." He looked at Tomas's hands, the scar, the patience. "Are you here to catch them?" "To understand," Tomas said. The rower, his name was Ilias, told him what the courtiers didn't care to know. Once, long ago or last winter, time ran differently under those trees. The sisters had stumbled upon the silver forest when grief had made the palace unbearable. The world below had offered them a place where no one asked them to be softer, brighter, smaller, more useful, more valuable, less complicated. They danced because dancing did not demand an explanation. Ilias and the others were bound to the lake by a half-curse, half-promise wound around an old wrong. A king had once taken something from the island and called it his. The forest had answered by tying night to need. The sisters came, the rowers waited, and the shoes wore out the way truth wears out lies. "How does it end?" Tomas asked. "When someone tells the right story to the right ears," Elias said, "and that story changes what those ears want." The lamps burned low. The sisters drank water that tasted of stars. At dawn's approach, they crossed back over the hush of the lake, through the forests brightening from within, up the tunnel into the room of silk and breath. They set slippers to rest like faithful dogs and lay down like exhausted miracles. Tomas returned to his bed and let a small, careful sleep borrow him. The second night he followed again, moved less by duty and more by the pull of music. He took a golden leaf this time and a small crystal cup from the island hall, tokens that would ring and shine in daylight. He spoke once more with Elias and learned the shape of their bond with the sisters, not ownership, not conquest, but recognition. "They are not yours," Tomas said, and Elias answered, "No, and we are not theirs." And still we meet. On the third morning, the king called him to court. The hall wore its important face. Courtiers counted the possible futures on their fingers. The 12 sisters stood in a row like a line of light that had learned to speak. "Well," the king asked, "where do my daughters go?" Tomas could have spun a victorious net and cast it over the sisters, trapping them in the very story that had tried to trap him. Man solves problem. Women are problem solved. He could have demanded a prize he didn't want and a wife he hadn't met. He thought of the old woman at the bridge and of debts measured in pairs and care. He thought of Annalise's shoulders loosening, of Mara's face open as dawn. He thought of shoes and what they are for. "They go to dance," he said simply. The hall leaned in. Hungry for scandal, he offered none. "Beneath your palace is a way into 3 forests, of silver, of gold, of diamonds, and beyond them a lake and a hall where musicians play until the night forgets its own length. 12 boats carry them there, 12 men row them back. The shoes wear out because joy is a kind of work." The king's mouth tightened. "You speak as if you approve." "I speak as if I have eyes," Tomas said, not unkindly, "and as if I have learned that guarding is not the same as keeping. Your proclamation promised reward for catching a thief. There is no thief. There is only a door you did not know existed. He set the twig of silver, the leaf of gold, and the crystal cup upon the marble like punctuation. These are not stolen. They were given. Murmurs rose, a wind of words that wanted to be a storm. The queen lifted a hand, and the wind remembered how to be a breeze. She had danced once long before her crown taught her different shoes. "Annalisa," she said, "is this true?" Annalisa stepped forward. She had the look of someone about to lay down a weight she can no longer carry. "It is," she said. "Father, we did not mean to deceive. We meant to survive. The day fills us like a room with too many chairs. At night, we found a place with no furniture. We used it. That is all." The youngest sister, Mara, spoke as well. "We always came back," she said softly, as if the word back were made of brass and needed polishing. The king looked at his daughters as if seeing the number 12 for the first time, not as a threat, but as an abundance. He looked at the man who might have claimed victory and instead offered a doorframe. Something complicated moved across his face and then resolved into something simple. "The terms of my proclamation were yours to interpret," he said at last. "What reward do you ask?" Tomas surprised himself by laughing. "A bed near a window that opens," he said. "Work that mends rather than breaks, and a pair of shoes I can wear out honestly." He glanced at the sisters and added, "And the right to say no to any bargain that confuses love with possession." The court did not know where to put such an answer. The queen did. "Done," she said, and the king, after a moment long enough to be brave, nodded. It did not end with trumpets. It ended with carpenters sealing the secret door, and then, after an evening of difficult listening, opening it again, this time with a lock only the sisters could turn. It ended with the proclamation taken down and another put up. In this house, joy is not contraband. It ended with the 12 sisters teaching their father a step he could manage and their mother remembering one she had not forgotten but misplaced. It ended with the rowers on the lake waiting less like prisoners and more like friends. With Ilias standing on the island steps at dusk, smiling into a sky that finally looked like a future instead of a ceiling. Tomas took a place in the palace as something between a guard and a gardener. He learned the names of the night-blooming flowers and how to tell a real danger from a fear that had borrowed armor. Sometimes he stood in the silver forest and listened to the leaves speak courage into the dark. Sometimes he leaned on the bridge where he had met the old woman and bought pears without bargaining. The scar along his jaw faded into an afterthought. As for the sisters, they kept dancing. Not every night. Joy, too, needs a shape to flourish in, but often enough that their shoes wore out at a pace cobblers could respect. Annalisa found ways to turn the king's rules toward kindness without breaking them like twigs. Mara learned to teach the palace children steps that let their bodies trust themselves. One sister fell in love with a musician and taught him the gentleness of silence. One fell in love with books and taught them to breathe when read aloud. Each found a day work that did not require her to abandon the night song inside her. If you pass the palace on a certain kind of evening, you may see through a high window a line of lanterns descending into the floor. Not a secret anymore, but a choice. You may hear, if the air is unafraid, a thread of music that remembers what feet are for. And if you stand still enough, you may feel the ground answering back with its old patient promise. There is room, even under stone, for the light we carry. Shoes will always wear out. That is not a problem. That is proof.